Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne, and today with my guest, Charlene Gethons. Charlene is a psychotherapist, mindfulness coach, and brain injury survivor. Charlene's goal is to empower female entrepreneurs in creating sustainable businesses that fit their lifestyle without letting imposter syndrome take over. Using mindfulness practices and therapeutic techniques, her clients learn how to trust themselves so that they can feel more confident in their work and in their decision making. Charlene, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. I'm excited to talk to you. I typically ask people to kick us off with their backstory and let us know how they get into their line of work that they're in. Before I do that, I just want to say to anybody listening, if you're kind of multitasking, half paying attention, you want to listen to this. This is kind of an unbelievable and amazing story. So on that note, with no pressure, maybe you could kind of share with the audience what you shared with me and sort of what led you here.
So almost 10 years ago, I was coming home from the movies, crossing the street, and next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. It was 2 weeks later because I'd been hit by a bus.
Hit by a bus.
Yeah, we all talk like, oh, I feel like I've been hit by a bus. Like I was literally hit by a bus. I sustained a traumatic brain injury, a couple of skull fractures, ended up needing surgery right then and there to reduce the pressure on my brain. That kicked off a journey that now 10 years and 10 surgeries later. But through that journey is when I started learning mindfulness for myself to help me with my anxiety, to help me with the reality that my whole life had changed in a minute. Everything that I had done before was done. My brain works differently than it used to. Everything had changed. And so mindfulness helped me with that because it's very much about accepting the reality of this moment with kindness, curiosity, non-judgment. Like that's kind of the mindfulness definition. And when you go through something, I mean, it doesn't have to be as big as my story, but anything, bringing kindness, curiosity, and non-judgment to this moment helps you through it. So now I teach this stuff to other people with chronic illnesses, people with invisible disabilities, for sure, and entrepreneurs in that regard, but to anyone, because we all have something. We all have something we're struggling with, and it doesn't have to be hit by a bus, traumatic brain injury. It could just be any daily stressor that we all have, because we all have something. And so mindfulness can help you navigate your way through it.
So first I want to say again that I'm so sorry that you went through all of that. It's a remarkable story, and thankfully you did make it out into the other side because I know you're now sharing all these lessons and making a difference with other people. So sometimes it's a little crazy how we get to where we are, but in your case, that certainly is true. But I am glad that you found a place that you feel comfortable and can be of service to people now. So I'm glad for that, and that your health is doing well. So let me say that first off. I want to touch on a couple of things, core concepts that you teach. I feel like they kind of all land in that overthinking and anxiety bucket if we sort of put a big category around them. And the first thing I want to explore is you talk about being able to bring yourself back into in the moment thinking versus catastrophizing everything. I'd love to explore that concept because I think it talks about trying to be present, but also for many of us in this group, we're overthinkers. So that whole go into worst case scenario can easily spiral and get you there. So talk to us a little bit about that concept.
Sure. And I started describing myself as a former overthinker because I overthought every single thing. I have conversations with my mom now, and she's like, she can't believe when I tell her, like, yeah, you know that play set that I didn't play with often? It's because like it needed to be filled with water. And I was like, well, what if my dolls get like wet and then they get ruined? And like how like I overthought everything. But mindfulness helps you to be in this moment. And when you notice your thoughts start to spiral, when you notice overthinking happening, through meditations, you start to learn how to like bring your mind back. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be focusing on the breath, and now I'm thinking of dinner, and oh, I come back. And doing that in a meditation helps you to do the exact same thing in your day-to-day life when you start overthinking. When you go too far into the future or too far into the past, it's like, well, no, right now I'm sitting here and I'm recording a podcast interview. This is all I need to think about right now. I don't need to think about what's coming next. I don't need to think about what happened before. This moment, because this moment's the only one I can do anything about. I can't do anything about what could come, what might not come, but I can do something about this right here, right now.
I like that. It's true. It's a difficult practice, as I'm sure you know, to really hone in on. So building off that, can you share any ideas for someone to help them stop worrying about the things they can't control? So, but beyond bringing yourself back to the moment, which is a practice, right? Like you said, you can try to build that muscle through meditation practices and such. Are there any other tools and techniques for that, kind of talking yourself off the ledge and stopping the worry about those things that you can't control?
And there's two things. There's one thing that I say to my students and stuff, this idea of future Charlene's problem. Like if there's something that could come or something that is coming, right? Like the holidays are coming and maybe I'm worried about the holiday season, or maybe I have something coming down the pike in 3 months. I have a choice, and this might sound hard for people to grasp, but I have the choice to worry about this thing that's coming, could come, may not come, may come 3 months, 6 months, a year from now. Or I could sort of choose to let that be future Charlene's problem. And like, again, come back to like, that may happen, that may not happen. But if it does happen, it's not happening for a week, 3 months, 6 months, like whatever the thing is. I don't need to worry about that right now. I can let future Charlene worry about it, because I also know that future Charlene has the skills to actually navigate it when it happens. I have the skills to an extent. We have the skills we need to get through whatever's coming. We've all survived everything that's come to us so far. So we have skills. We do the best that we can in each and every situation. But why would I want to spend all my time worrying about what might happen when it might never come? We do this. We've done this. I've done this. And that's why I'm always saying, every time you notice, well, that's future Charlene's problem, right? She's got this. Like when it comes, like she knows what to do. And so I don't need to worry about that right now. And if there's anything that I can actually do in this moment to prepare future Charlene, then great, I'll do that. If, as I said, like, because the holidays are coming up, if it's the holidays you're stressing out over, well, what can I do today to take the load off of future Charlene's Christmas dinner or whatever the worry is? Well, I can make sure I've got all my groceries. Great, I'll do that. That's productive, that's helpful, and that soothes the anxiety and the overthinking and the worrying about the holiday dinner, because you're taking productive action. We sometimes think that overthinking, worrying about is coping, right? Like, well, I'm preparing myself. If things don't work out the way I want them to, I've already, I've thought it all through. I'm prepared. And that's not really helping us, because it's just leaving all that worry inside of us. It's all just going to sit down inside of our bodies. We don't want to do that. We want to find other ways to work this energy out. And so doing something, as I said, like helping to prepare for that future event, if it is an actual thing that's coming, what can I do now to prepare for it? If it's not a thing, if it's just a worry, like I've had a lot of surgeries, there's always the possibility that I could need more. Do I want to spend the rest of my life thinking every day, well, what if this happens and then I might need more surgery? No, I don't. But I know it's a possibility because I've had so many surgeries. It's a possibility. But that's future Charlene's problem. Right now, got enough on my plate to, like, actual concerns on my plate to worry about. I'm gonna take this one off. And it's a practice, and it's coming back, and it's doing breath work, like meditations and breathing your way through it. It's movement. I teach mindful walking. I also teach this idea. It's called TIP, TIPP. So temperature, putting something cold on the back of your neck if you're starting to spiral. It shocks the system and brings you back. Going outside in the winter without a coat on. Brief, like not for an hour, a couple of minutes. Sticking your face in a bowl of cold water. These are actual things you can do if you're noticing that, like, you're starting to panic. Intense exercise. I power walk. Put on my shoes, I grab my coat, and I take a walk down the street. I notice can feel like the blood boiling at that moment, and then it starts to settle down, and I start to come back, and then I can maybe breathe my way through it. That's the T and the I, and the 2 P's are paced breathing paired with muscle relaxation. So it's breathing in, making fists, and breathing out and releasing. These are, you don't have to do all 3, but these are things that you can do when you notice I'm starting to spiral. I can make fists and I can release them. I can do this anywhere because I don't have, I've got my hands up in the air to show it, but you don't have to do it like that. Jumping jacks, running in place, taking a fast walk. These are all things that you can do to get it working its way out of your body, because everything is connected. Our thoughts, our emotions, sensations.
I love all those ideas. And I also love the concept of being able to sort of give it a name by saying, give it to the future Charlene or whoever, right? Because I talk about incorporating a pause into our life for lots of different reasons. But I think that just knowing that you can sort of make that conscious decision to say, is this something I need to worry about today? Or is this not something I need to worry about today? And if not, give it to my future self. I think that's a really great concept that people can sort of build onto, having that idea and build onto it. I also love the other things you said about kind of snapping yourself out of it when you start to spiral. You gave some really great ideas. You also touched on, you named it a mindful walking practice. Can you elaborate on that? Because I have a lot of people that are on this wellness journey and incorporating movement, a lot of walkers. I think people are also trying to be more mindful. So tell me what that means to you.
So a mindful walking practice, as I would normally teach it, is, and you can do this inside, you can do this outside. You might want to do it inside, especially at the beginning, because you tend to walk a lot slower. So you take your right foot and you put it like the heel down, and as you move forward, you feel the weight of your body shifting from the heel to the ball of your foot, noticing what muscles are activated in your leg as you take that step and put your weight on it. And then as the left leg moves forward, doing the same. So it's very slowed down. When we would do the training to teach this stuff, there was a room full of people and we looked like zombies. It looked like a scene out of The Walking Dead, all of us just slowly walking. But that's how it starts. It's bringing all of your attention and your awareness into the body and feeling the movement of walking, which we never do. We never pay this much attention. And that's training the brain, rewiring it through mindfulness. It's being really attentive and paying attention. It's taking a walk without listening to a podcast or an audiobook. It's being just with the walk. And you don't have to do it as slow as I described it. You can just take a walk and really notice, feel the ground under your feet. Notice the muscles that are being activated, noticing your breath as you're walking, noticing your surroundings. How many times do you take a walk? If you have a dog, if you just walk down the street, do you ever really pay attention to your surroundings? You could walk down the same street day after day after day after day and never even notice that your neighbor painted their door.
Yeah.
Or hey, look at this tree. This garden is beautiful. I've lived here for 20 years and I've never noticed this garden.
Yeah.
Right? We don't pay attention because we like to multitask. And taking a walk is a great time for me to listen to this podcast or catch up on this or call a friend, right? And all those things are great, but if you're trying to be more mindful, maybe just taking the walk, doing just the one thing.
Yeah, I love that advice. And I am so guilty of that. My husband jokes with me because I can come down our street and we only have a couple of houses on our street. Somebody literally could paint their house and I would not notice for months because I'm just preoccupied. So yeah, I totally get that. And I like that advice. I've heard of somebody else who talks about a mindful walk with being barefoot in the grass so that you can feel the grass and the earth on your feet. And I kind of think that feeds into the same concept that you're talking about there. That's neat. Something people can try. I want to go back for a minute about something you said when you were talking about your backstory. And you talked about how when you got hit by the bus, that your whole life changed. The whole trajectory of what you had planned for yourself, probably what others had planned for you, your thinking process, everything changed. And all of a sudden that picture you had in your head had to be gone. And managing that is you obviously became an expert at something you now teach, which is managing expectations around things that are versus what we thought they should be or what we, expected them to be. You had a frontline experience with that. How did you do that for yourself? Because it was such a dramatic change. And what do you share with people on how to do that? If something changes, a spouse dies and you predicted you'd be together forever, or I don't know, you lose your job, great job, and suddenly you're going from, having a cushy life to having a very hard life. I don't know, there's all kinds of scenarios. Like you said, everybody's going through something. Mm-hmm. What do you teach on that? And what did you go through yourself?
So what I teach on that, and this again comes back to mindfulness, is mindfulness is about paying attention to the moment on purpose, but it's also about accepting the reality of the present moment with kindness, curiosity, non-judgment. Like that's all connected. Now, when I say acceptance and reality acceptance, I talk a lot about accepting the reality of this moment. You never have to like it. You can dislike. Like, I hate this, but this is what's here. Because accepting it, and as I said, it's not like, well, now I'm okay with it because I've accepted it. Like, you don't have to like it. But accepting it is that, all right, so this thing happened. I accept it in the sense of, or acknowledging it, because a lot of people that I work with hate the word acceptance. Like, it's too hard for them. But acknowledge, allow, working to be okay with. Acceptance is about this happened. Now I have to do something about it. I don't have to like it, but how can I work with this? What can I do?
I like the distinction. I like the distinction of not having to be okay with it. I think that's probably key on setting people free in their ability to accept it. You don't have to like it. You can hate it. I'm sure you do. But like you said, it happened. You can't go back and have it not happen.
Yeah. And all the wishful thinking, or I wish it didn't, or this shouldn't have happened. This is unfair. Why did this happen to me? This isn't right. That doesn't change what happened. And they're all true thoughts in a sense that, like, this isn't fair. And like, why did this happen to me? But it did happen. It's Katie Byron. She teaches, I'm going to forget it, but she teaches something about the shoulds, right? The 4 questions, I think is what it's called. And it's all around the shoulds. This shouldn't have happened to me. Well, is that true? Well, it did happen. So it is true. And it's acknowledging, that's back to accepting reality. Like, I don't have to like this, but it did happen. And I could fight the reality of this shouldn't have happened, but it did. And I'm wasting energy fighting something that has already happened. It has already happened. I don't have to like it, but what can I do for myself to help me through it? And I know that people listening to this might fight up against this idea because it's tough. This isn't easy work. Acceptance isn't easy. It takes a lot of time. It's like a puzzle. Like, you think you've accepted it, and then like 3 years later, another piece of the puzzle comes up and you're like, oh, now I have to fit this into my acceptance puzzle. because it's not a one and done, but it's constantly coming back and like, all right, well, this happened. It might not feel fair. I don't have to like it, but it happened. There's literally nothing I can do. I can't go back in time. I can't erase what happened. It happened. It was a horrible experience, like for me, or if you've lost a spouse or lost a career. Those things all happened. And one of the things we have to do, in addition to sort of accepting it, is we have to mourn the loss of the life we thought we were going to have, the loss of a person, the loss of the career. Like grief is happening in all of those situations. We think of it as just somebody passed away and that's grieving, but there's so much more. Like grief, like everything is like a spectrum. And we might not equate the loss of a partner with the loss of a career at the same level of grief, but that doesn't mean you're not grieving. We have expectations, we have ideas, we have visions of our lives. And when they're radically changed in a moment, we need to process that as a loss and as a grief. We need to mourn it. And that helps us as well. It's kind and it's compassionate. In addition to, this happened, I need to work towards acknowledging it, accepting it, allowing it, working to be not necessarily okay with it. Can I sit with this? Can I allow the reality of this to be in my life? I don't have to like it, but can I allow it to be here? Can I stop fighting against it?
Yeah, I think that's a key part. Stop fighting against it. And I do like the fact that you brought in to remember, to mourn it, and to acknowledge it as a loss, because I actually did a series on grief not too long ago. And one of the things that kept coming up is that there are all these types of losses in our life, and often we don't deal with them. And they sort of just pile on to each other until there's some breaking point and something that, really major happens, and then they just sort of blow up. But I think it's important to your point, to acknowledge it as a loss and to, maybe give yourself a moment to think through all of what you thought you'd have and realize it's gone. And yeah, say your goodbyes to that vision and then start working on what's the new vision for yourself. So yeah, I think that's a key concept. I want to switch gears and talk about, you mention in your own bio that you talk about working with people on imposter syndrome. So two things. I'd love it if you could give your definition of what that is for some folks that might be listening and not really know or haven't really dealt with that concept before. So if you could maybe give a high level definition of what it is, and then what kind of advice do you give to people to overcome it?
So imposter syndrome is this feeling that like you're kind of like less than, right? It's this sense that I talk about it with entrepreneurs. Like there was the longest time that I was like, well, I'm not like a real entrepreneur because I can't work as much as somebody else because of my health and everything alongside that. And I was like, why? Like feeling like a fraud, like, oh, I'm not the same. Like, oh, I'm just treating this as a hobby. And I was all these thoughts. And I was like, no, I'm a business owner just as much as everybody else is a business owner. Just because my business looks different doesn't make me an imposter. I'm not a fraud. I'm just running my business differently. Like there are different ways to run businesses. And that feeling can come up for everyone, regardless of what life circumstance, right? That feeling of, I'm a fraud, they're going to find me out. Like I'm just pretending, but one day they're going to realize that I don't know what I'm doing. And so learning to work with that imposter syndrome is with noticing the thoughts, noticing how this is showing up. They said, referring to my business as running it as like a hobby. And I was like, why am I treating myself this way? Why am I talking about myself in such a manner? I am working as hard as I can in my capacity, and that's fine. But it shows up in so many little ways. Like somebody will say something like, well, all of us, like we all do this. So why do you have a problem with this? Everybody else doesn't can do it. And so you should be able to too. And it's the shoulds, right? You shouldn't have a problem with this. We can all do it. And then you're just like, oh, but I'm having a problem with this. So that means that there's something wrong with me. And that's how imposter syndrome can show up. That's why I talk so much about it, because there isn't anything wrong with you. it's okay for you to have difficulty with something that maybe comes easier to somebody else, because there is something that comes easy to you that comes hard to them. That doesn't make you a fraud or an imposter or less than. And it's the noticing the thoughts and how they show up, and working to sort of let them go and to not attach to these thoughts. Because it all comes back to what we talked about at the beginning, and mindfulness and noticing the thoughts and the overthinking. All of these things are connected.
Always, all of them are all connected. So on that note, with it being all about the thoughts, talk to me a little bit about how you advise people to sort of cut through all those negative beliefs, those limiting thoughts that can hold us back. Because part of what you do with working with people that are trying to create businesses is to make them be more confident, make them trust themselves, teach them that they can make decisions and they're good enough and all of those things. And I know those thoughts that we tend to have, we all have limiting beliefs that just constantly loop.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get past those? How do we ignore those? What is your advice there?
When I teach meditations, I teach a thought meditation. And the idea there is to, as you're meditating, when thoughts arise, to let them sort of float past like clouds in the sky, leaves floating down a stream. Like, it sounds very relaxing. Here's a thought, and it just floats on past. And it's the same concept when you're not meditating and noticing thoughts. We want to create, they call like a space between our thoughts and sort of how we react. So it's noticing our thoughts from a distance. And one way we can do that when our thoughts start to spiral is we can sort of put them as like speak to our thoughts in like the third person. Like, whoa, Charlene, you're being really hard on yourself right now, right? So you're not saying, wow, I'm being really hard on myself, because then it keeps it all personalized and centered. You're putting that space by like, now the thoughts are another person, right? It's still you, but it's you in the third person. So it creates a bit of a distance just right then and there. Whoa, Charlene, do you hear what you're saying to yourself? I often do it as in with my last name, like, whoa, Gethons, really? Like, do you notice what you're saying? Because it's usually when we're spiraling, we don't notice until the most outlandish thought is the one that we notice. Like, wow, I've just spent 10 minutes thinking about this thing, and I didn't realize until I had this like completely out there thought about whatever. And that's when we know, like, that shocks us into the like, whoa, what just happened? And so the Gethons, like, or the Charlene, or the first, like putting your in the third person. Another way, and this can be sillier, is you can sing this stuff, like the thought that you're having. You can sing it out loud, or you can say it out loud in a silly voice. That also creates that distance. It might feel super weird doing it, but it creates such a huge gap between you and the thought, because now it's coming out in this funny voice or a song. And so you might even giggle because you're like, what the heck? But that's different, because now you're like, wait, what the heck? Versus like feeling this and believing this and like, this must be true. Now it seems so much sillier because it's in this weird, like Kermit the Frog voice or whatever.
I kind of love that one, because I can picture singing it out and being like, laughing at yourself, right? And that's the whole point. You kind of snap out of it at that point because you realize how silly you are just because you're singing this crazy thought process that you're going through, which means nothing. So I love that idea. That's a pretty funny concept. So if everybody around here starts talking to themselves and singing to themselves, we'll know that we can come back and blame you for that one.
We can.
So I wanted to just jump back to you for a minute and ask you, you went through something really traumatic and it led you here, but what do you think is the most positive thing that you got out of getting hit by a bus, which again sounds kind of crazy, but what would you say is your biggest takeaway?
And this is going to sound funny because it's my business, but like, learning mindfulness was the greatest gift. And I would never have learned this if this hadn't have happened to me. And I've said this before, and I teach mindfulness in a brain injury group. And I've said it to them, and it gets hard to hear. But I said, if this had never happened to me, I would never have learned mindfulness. And mindfulness has truly transformed my life in so many ways that it's been the greatest gift. And it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And now I'm teaching it to other people. But like, I couldn't talk to people at all. Ordering something in a restaurant, the waiter comes back to ask questions. And like, I'm deer in headlights, can't speak. Friends have had to speak up for me. I struggled ordering a pizza. I struggled and overthought and was so anxious about everything. And then mindfulness helped me to get past that, to be on the other side where like there's so much more ease in my life and joy, even in the midst of all of this madness that I've been going through over the last 10 years. And that's because of mindfulness. I have made more friends. I've traveled on my own. I've done things I thought I could never do, all because I got out of my head and into my life, which is what I talk about with mindfulness. Like, it gets you out of your head. It gets you to stop overthinking. Could you imagine how much more you could do in your life if you didn't overthink everything? You could come on a podcast if that's what you want to do, but you're too afraid to do it. I've taught workshops. I taught conferences. I went whitewater rafting. All these things, I thought I could never do that. Turns out I could. I just had to get out of my own way. And that's the gift that mindfulness gave me.
That's the gold right there in your message. Just to point it out. I mean, that's your leading story because that's so inspirational. And you said, despite of, I'm paraphrasing, but despite of what happened to you, you got this crazy gift out of it. And as you were speaking that, I could feel like in so many ways, your life is better now.
Yeah.
Even though, right? I don't want to minimize all that you've been through because I only know a tiny snippet and it's a crazy ride, but you still have gained so many gifts because of that.
Yeah, so many. And it's hard for people to grasp because I wouldn't erase what happened to me, because if it had never happened, I would never have learned mindfulness. I wouldn't be on this path that I'm on now where like there is so much more joy in my life. And I had said that in a group and somebody was like, well, I would erase it in a second. But another member was like, no, I wouldn't either. Do I like all the side effects of what's happened to me? No, but that goes back to acceptance. I don't have to like it.
Yeah.
But I live with it and I work with it and all that stuff. But because I'm more aware, more mindful, I notice like the good with the bad versus before, like something goes wrong in the morning and that's it. Your whole day is ruined. Oh, we just had a snowstorm here in Toronto. Oh, the roads were awful and I had to scrape off my car and I'm late for work and that's it. And then like you're in a bad mood for the rest of the day and everything sucks and everything's a big disaster versus, all right, so the road sucked and now I'm a little late for work. Do I want to stay in that space of beating myself up mentally for being late for work and all the crap that on the road and all that stuff? Well, no. Now I'm like, all that still happened, but now I also feel like crap. And so mindfulness is about removing all that. I call it like, I didn't create this idea, but I teach it. It's the 2 arrows. So the first arrow is the inevitable pains of life. So there's a snowstorm in Toronto. That's inevitable in December. This happens. The second arrow is our thoughts and judgments and resistance to the first arrow. So I could like shoulds and this isn't fair and like now I'm late for work and now the car and everybody sucks and they can't drive and this, that, and the other. That's that second arrow. That one's optional. I don't need to keep slinging that arrow at myself. So I can let go of that and just deal with the first arrow, the reality of having to drive slower, having to scrape off my car. Maybe I'm a little late for work. Maybe I'm a bit more frustrated when I get into work. And then I can work with that, remove some of the frustration. I've talked about, the breathing exercises, the movement exercises, and let that go and then move on with my day. Or I could stay stuck in that place and everything sucks and I hate everybody and
doesn't bring you anywhere.
No, and now I just feel so much more crappy because of that. So I teach people how to let go of that second arrow, to notice when it's happening and to just like, okay, this has happened. How can I move forward? We don't want to stay in that place because it just permeates through everything. I had to go out early this morning. Do I like waking up early? No. But I do it because that's the time my appointment was at. I did it. I came home, whatever. I let go of that, and now it's on to the next thing. That's what mindfulness is. It's all about letting go of what happened and being in this moment. Coming back again and again and again every time you need to. Whenever you notice, stuck in the future, stuck in the past, come back. It helps make everything easier because I could have this situation right now, plus all my thoughts about the past, plus all my worries about the future, all together, or I could just have what's here in this moment. And it sounds so simple in concept, harder in practice, but it's a practice. And the more we practice, the easier things get because we become used to it. We train our brain to think differently.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip. And I think it's a good note to kind of wrap things up on, because I always say our mess becomes our message, and yours obviously became your message. And I think the message that you just gave is important to people because many of us are trying to, level up. We're in a different point in our lives. Things are a little bit different, and we're sort of looking in retrospect and trying to figure out what our next chapter looks like and what, where we move to. And I think many of us are working to become more mindful and seeing examples of how impactful that can be on life. It's helpful. It's always helpful to see other people that have incorporated something, and also affirming to hear that it's not a switch that's on and off. It's a practice that you have to be intentional about, and you have to repeat over and over and over and over and over and over and over, because however old you are, our brains are wired the way we've been for the last whatever years. As you start to incorporate some of these things, it doesn't happen overnight. You just have to keep working at it and to bring more and more of it into your life. So thank you for sharing that. As we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to leave out there with the audience? I want to give you an opportunity to do that.
We talked a lot about thoughts and how thoughts show up. I just want to reiterate to people that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not facts. Just because your brain tells you something doesn't mean it's true. And that's another way of creating that distance from a thought. This person thinks I'm this. Do I know this? How do I know this? Did they say it, or did I think it in my head? Right? Because we do this. Like I could say oh, you're mad at me right now. How do I know? Well, your arms are crossed and your brow is furrowed. Well, does that mean that do I know you're mad at me? What I know is your arms are crossed and your brow is furrowed. But do I know that has anything to do with me? No. But we do this. We create these stories in our heads. And so it's always noticing what is showing up. It sounds so cumbersome, but it's not a 10-minute process. It's with time, it becomes a lot faster. You don't have to think about doing it. You just do it. That's why it's a practice.
Yeah, that's why it's a practice. And that's not a new concept to folks that are in the group or that listen to the podcast. We've studied some of Dr. Amy Johnson's work, and she talks all about thoughts, and what they are, and that they're not us, and we are not our thoughts. They don't make us who we are, right? So there's a whole bunch of work in that space that I think many of us have thought about and been focused on, because I think that's one of the key things that sort of unlock the door to letting us find some inner peace and learn how to act more intentionally, be more mindful, all those good things. Well, thank you for sharing that. I will be sure to share all of your links and ways people can get in touch with you in the show notes. It's been great. Thanks for catching up with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.